Natalie Mrachacz-Kersting, she's professor at Aalborg University, and she received her PhD from Aalborg, and we have actually two people from Aalborg. I'm also a PhD from Aalborg as an honorary PhD degree, and I'm also the faculty at Aalborg, not visiting as an adjunct affiliated faculty. It's one of the prestigious research center for rehabilitation. In fact, 1990s, first time when we met, there was nothing there. We had small together, and we were talking about the building rehabilitation center. Kim was one of them, and also Thomas.
Yeah.
We had a picture, and it turned into the largest rehabilitation institute in Europe right now. Many colleagues, including Daria Farina, Natalie, and others, they have been affiliated, and center has multiple grants in the areas of neuro, and her research contribution in the areas of brain-computer interface neurotechnologies, she received one of the most prestigious Danish awards to continue research on the brain-computer interface, and it's a great honor and pleasure having Natalie here. Natalie is not from Germany originally, she's from Austria, and also she had the postdoc position in New Zealand and also the Australian. And I'm the goodwill ambassador with my wife to Australia as well. So we have some connections.
Okay, so can you all hear me very well? Can you hear me up there? Very good. So first of all, I would like to thank Messi and Yasmin, and of course the local people here at this university for having me. And it's a beautiful country. Crete is fantastic. How do you work here? It's so beautiful. You pretend. Very good. So as Megan said, I'm going to talk to you about brain-computer interfaces, but because this is kind of an advanced school, and especially yesterday we talked a great deal about how we can bring this technology into the clinic. I want to give you an example of my research approach and how we have now successfully been able to place a brain-computer interface into the clinical setting. So I'm going to kind of start from the beginning a little bit, I guess. And I only have half an hour, so let's hope that I keep to my time. 20 minutes?
28 minutes.
Oh, okay, good. So, brain-computer interfaces. I think one of the first things I want to show you is actually where is Aalborg, because very recently I was invited to speak in London, and I was at the airport and I was at the baggage bound, and on the baggage bound they always have Aalborg, I don't know, some other big Barcelona, Paris. There were two gentlemen standing there saying, Aalborg, where on earth is Aalborg? Nobody really knows. But it's a really nice place in Denmark. So what you can see, Denmark is here at the very top of Europe almost. And then we have Aalborg, which is almost at the top. You only have Skagen that is high, and Skagen is very famous with artists. It's very famous for its lights, and it has a very special light. And we had the nice red moon yesterday and the beautiful sunrise this morning, but there the light is also very, very special. So this is really where I come from, and SME, which I'm part of, the Center for Sensory Motor Interaction, and also Metin is part of, was actually founded in 1993, and two young gentlemen, Lars and Thomas, who were at the time quite young, a little bit below 40, or maybe even 40. They got but they received a large sum of money to found this center, and it's continued on all this time, even after the funding ran out, because they've been so successful in getting external funding, because they've been very innovative too. So one other thing that Aalborg is very famous for is this. It's aquavit. It's a schnapps. And at every Christmas party, the Danish people, because they eat very heavily, they have 2 bottles at a table of 8 people. So you can imagine what these Christmas parties are like. But the distillery for this is in fact in Aalborg itself. So I've been there for about 10 years now. I finished my PhD, moved to New Zealand for 7 years, then came back, and I continue to be there. And now, actually, later in this year, I'm moving to a different place, which looks quite different, and this is it. It's University of Applied Sciences and Arts in Dortmund, and this is where it's located here. It's actually in the middle of the city, which is kind of really nice. And you can't really see it there but there's a hospital there, so there's a lot of working together with the hospital, with the clinical staff in that hospital there, so I'm really hoping to be able to shake some things up there as well. But I've talked enough about where I'm from. Now to the actual problem. So this is a problem that, of course, we've heard about a little bit. If we talk about neurological diseases, I'm a neuroscientist, and one of these neurological diseases is, of course, stroke. Look at the amount of money it costs the EU 27 states per year. Just stroke alone, it is 45 billion euros every year is spent just for stroke. And this goes all the way from the intensive care up to the rehabilitation process. It's time out of work, etc. So it's a huge sum of money. And it continues to be a problem. And now what I have noticed, I don't know what it's like here in Greece, but I have noticed in Denmark, the individuals that are suffering from stroke are getting younger. Younger and younger. And I think maybe this is because of the stressful life that we nowadays lead, I don't know. But it's kind of scary. You can imagine if they survive the stroke, they're going to be living with their disability for a long time. So it's really important that we try and understand how we can implement technology, first of all, to deal with the numbers. There are never enough hospital staff to deal with all the patients, so they can't get enough care. So that's one thing. And also how to give them the proper intensity and the care at the right time. So just, an even scarier number, I think, is that by 2030, this number here is going to increase by 12%. Can you imagine? It's crazy. So what we're striving for, at least in Denmark, and I'm hoping in my new place as well, is a place that I have modeled according to a place where a very good friend of mine works, Santa Lucia. This is the Fondazione Santa Lucia in Rome. We've also heard about some fantastic places, obviously, in the States. But this Fondazione in Santa Lucia, it is a rehabilitation institute that combines these traditional approaches with very novel technologies. And you can see some pictures of it here. So you have normal physiotherapy, but you also have robotic devices being implemented. You have some brain-computer interfaces intermixed in this as well. And why can this center function the way it does? It can do so because the head doctor there, he's really into technology. And he really wants to implement this new technology into the hospital. So they're very successful, this center, in actually having their patients come through. But this is still too rare. And when I think at my hospital where I work, it's still very traditional. I had a very hard time, and I'll tell you about that later, to actually get them to even try my new technology. Now we're working on it. But this is actually a fantastic center, and I think Seth Reimer, who a lot of you didn't hear speak yesterday, he's working in a center. Some of the others here are working at fantastic centers too that are trying to do this. It's very important. Good. But when we talk about things like a stroke, for example, what is the goal? The goal is, of course, for me, at the moment, I don't work with cognitive problems so much, but it is really to reestablish this lost motor function. That's really the goal. And a brain-computer interface, the way that I've been using it, for those of you who don't know what that is, a brain-computer interface, basically, it picks up signals from the brain. This can be either invasive, and I don't deal with that, or it can be non-invasive. And those signals are picked up, they're applied, then some features are extracted from these ongoing brain signals, and they're then translated into some kind of command. And this can be a command for many different things. And BCIs are used nowadays for many different things also. I mean, they're not just used for, what I work with is replacement and restoration of lost motor function, but they're also used to improve performance, to enhance performance, etc. So BCIs are now really becoming a more integral part of society already. So I'm going to talk a little bit about these two in my research and how I went about it. So to do that, I'm going to look not just at stroke, but at another neurological disease as well. So two different approaches that I take. And I'm hoping that these videos are going to play now. This is a young gentleman who suffered a stroke. And all he's trying to do is he's trying to pick up this bottle. It's a Friday afternoon. He's had a hard day at work. He just wants to have a nice ice-cold bottle of beer. That's what he really wants. And he can't grab it. This is just immediately after the stroke. And then if we look at what happens to him a number of weeks after therapy, this is in the Hamel Neurocenter where I work, you can see that he can actually perform the function. He doesn't perform like you and I, but he's actually able to do this. So this requires restoration of lost motor function. It's a very different approach to this gentleman who's sitting here. This patient is suffering from ALS, and you cannot hear this now, unfortunately, because we couldn't make the sound work. But he's got a respirator at the back here. It makes a lot of noise, and he's trying to use a brain-computer interface in order to, control something on the screen. Now, if you can imagine, I don't know how many of you work with EEG. How many of you have tried placing electrodes on the head and measuring? I can see some people say, yeah, me. I mean, can you imagine doing this in the home where you have a device like this? I mean, the noise and the signal is enormous, and we are only dealing with very small signals from the EEG that we're interested in. They're in the microvolt range, and now we have like millivolt volt range that is giving us noise. So you can imagine it's a real challenge to actually do this, which is why today there are really not really any BCI devices in the home setting as yet, and we're working very hard at this. But what we're doing with him, I mean, he has ALS, which means he basically, at some point in time, all his motor neurons will cease to function. So eventually he will die, not necessarily of ALS, maybe of some infection, but he will not be able to function at all after a number of months, if he's lucky like Steve Hawking, after a number of years. So this is something, a different way. So we will never be able to restore his function, but we will be able to help him replace function. For these patients, this is really important because, can you imagine, once you have a respiratory control, you can't breathe independently, you must have a caretaker in your house 24/7. That means someone is with you constantly. While you sleep, they watch you to ensure that nothing's going wrong. In Denmark, that is the law. You must do this. So can you imagine you have no privacy anymore? And even if you are locked in, you want at least some privacy. So this is something that we're trying to give back to them. Okay, but let's now go back again to, to stroke. A closer look at this and how I went about it. So I've shown you these two videos here. So this kind of improvement in function that you've just seen, that can happen irrespective of what you do, right? You can just have normal conventional therapy and you get that kind of return to function. There are other ways of doing this, and one of them from some very good friends in Belgrade who have been working at functional electrical stimulation, and I know that others have as well, that are sitting in this room. So here's an example of a patient using functional electrical stimulation. So you see some electrodes that he has on his arm, and he is activating the stimulator in order to perform the function. In this case, it is drinking the cup of coffee, of water, whatever is in there. You'll see him in a moment doing the same when he is trying to pour himself some juice and so on. So I won't show you all of those. But let's have a look at what happens to this patient, the same patient, before and after this therapy. And I think this was like 4 or 6 weeks of therapy. So here he is trying to pick up this can of Coke. He's unable to do so. This is after a number of weeks of therapy with FES. It's fantastic. It works beautifully. You'll see him in a moment trying to pick up a phone, and he's unable to do so, but after a number of weeks of therapy, he has no problem in picking up the phone. I'll just let you see that before I go on. So you see there, he's picking it up without any problems. Then I have one more example here. This is not from me. Actually, this is something that I got from the internet because I was interested to see what else is out there, and I wanted to show it to you. This is my electrical control and using feedback. So what you can see here is you have a number of electrodes on the arm, and you can see this is the feedback that the therapist is getting. So when he's forming abduction, bringing everything close to the body, he should be activating this muscle. When he's performing abduction away from the body, then he should be activating these muscles. So this is what the therapist sees. So the therapist can give immediate feedback to the patient. The patient himself sees this screen here. So he actually is not allowed to get into this zone when he's going into abduction, and when he's going into, adduction, when he's going into abduction, he has to stay away from this zone. So all of this works, and all of this is very fine, and no problem at all, it's very nice. One of the issues is that most of these studies that you see are being done in the chronic phase of stroke, okay? Because that's when people have most access to these patients. So some of these patients are out of therapy for a number of months, maybe even years, and then we get to try out our nice technology. And of course, this is not ideal, and it's not ideal for several reasons. I mean, one, most of the improvements actually occur in the acute subacute phase in the first 3 months after stroke. That is when you see most improvements in function in these patients. So this is a time window that we have to really make a difference. And there was actually John Krakauer from the States. He proposed this thing called the proportional recovery rule. So let's take a closer look at this. So if you have from 0 to 100% of your motor function, then in the pre-phase, so this is after you've just had a stroke, you might be left with maybe 15% of your function. So you have the potential in reality, the goal is to get to 100%, so your potential is about 85% in this case, right? If we just say an arbitrary number here. So this is really the goal of rehab, is to get us up there. Well, what actually happens, and what his team have found out over a number of years, and others have actually replicated, is this. This is really reality. This is before, the same as here, and this is how much patients really recover in the first number of months. And there are some that don't recover at all, but for most patients, they only improve by 70% of their potential. They will not improve more than this 70% mark. This is the proportional recovery rule. And this is, in a way, a little bit scary because it kind of shows that whatever we do in the first 3 months of stroke is not working. Because everybody, irrespective of what you do, is recovering to the same extent. So what we need to do as engineers, as doctors, as teams, is to try and develop methodologies where we can actually go over the 70%. We're going to get over this, beyond this, in order to really help these patients. Because after the 3 months, yes, there is still recovery, but it's nowhere near as good as it could be if we try to target them in this particular phase. So this is something that we have tried to do, and I just want to show you my approach. So, whoops, let me just go over this. So, this is something that we've been talking about a little bit, how to merge all these different disciplines. And when I think about a problem at my institute, I think of 3 basic players. Right? It's really a threefold user that we're dealing with here. On the one hand, you have the basic neuroscience. You need to have knowledge, how does the brain repair itself? Or how can we get it to repair itself? Without that knowledge, what are you going to develop? At the same time, you need to know what is feasible in terms of technology. What are we able to do? Okay? And very, very, very importantly, this transfer into the clinical or the home setting, this requires absolutely that you talk not only to the clinicians, but also to the patients, also to the doctors. Okay? And I'll give you one very quick example. The study that I'm going to show you in a moment, when we first wanted to introduce this to the hospital, we had a very clear idea of what we wanted to do. Then we came to the hospital and the staff said, well, first of all, our patients have to do so much other training. They have to do things like, for example, hand training. They have to go and try shopping again because, they have to be rehabilitated into their own home. They have to do strength training. Then they have to do cognitive training. Then they have to do, and the list just went on and on. So they said, if you want our patients, maybe we can try with 1. And you will only get the patient for half an hour because after half an hour, the patients are tired. They can't think anymore. Right? They need to have a small amount of time. So whatever technology you use has to fit in that window. And I'm talking half an hour to prepare the subject or the patient, to do the intervention, and then to wheel them back to their room so they can be picked up for whatever they have to do next or for their resting time. So it's little things like that that are so important. But there are many other aspects to this as well. But the dialogue is really important. And even though I say this plus this, it's actually a 3-way interaction continuously because we have to go back and change things in a continuous manner. So let's start now with the stroke rehabilitation and the BCI for stroke rehabilitation. What were we thinking here? So this young gentleman here, Donald Oldingham, he proposed on theoretical grounds already in I think his book came out in 1949, that cells that fire together will wire together. In other words, if you want to induce kind of plasticity, you have to ensure that the cells are firing at the same time or at a similar time in order for them to strengthen their synaptic connections. If this does not happen, forget about it. Nothing's going to happen. And after this time, and actually quite a lot, this was theoretical. No one had proven this yet, nor in animals, or not even in humans, obviously. But then, this young gentleman here, I don't have a good picture of Tim Bliss, I should probably get one, but Tej Lerlo and Tim Bliss, they actually reported on LTP already in 1973. The first time that they report on LTP. LTP is long-term potentiation. It basically is the same as cells that fire together, wire together. And it's really interesting for those students in here. I've always quoted, the previous Donald Olin Hebb, but I've recently been in contact with Terje Rommel. He's in his 80s, way beyond his 80s, a very nice man. And he's recently published, and I recommend you to look into this if you're interested, this article in Neurophysiological, where he talked about the development of LTP. And in fact, it had nothing to do with Donald Hebb. They didn't even know about it at the time. There was no talk about cross disciplines. And he said, imagine if we had known about some of these theories all that time ago, if we would have talked to these kind of psychologists, we might have discovered LTP a lot earlier. So it was quite interesting for me. So it's an interesting read, actually. So the basic neuroscience then, how do you do this in humans? So I should say that they showed this in animals. So what they did is they took hippocampal slices out of the brain of different types of animals, and then they stimulated one neuron, and they recorded from the other neuron. They stimulated with high frequency, and what they also did is they stimulated one neuron, and then stimulated the other neuron when the previous, signal from the previous neuron had actually reached the postsynaptic cell. Right? So they were basically combining these two stimulations all the time. And that produces LTP, which is a long-lasting change, an increase in synaptic efficacy. So the synapses become more efficient when they fire. So in 2000, I think it was, at the University of Rostock in Germany, a number of people came along, and they tried to test this non-invasively in humans. So this is kind of the next really big step. So in 1973, LTP was discovered. Many, many studies followed. But it was not until the year 2000 that this was tested out in humans. Okay, there's a huge gap, right? Huge. So what did they do? I mean, this is from one of our studies, but the thing is basically is exactly the same. They stimulate the nerve that innervates the target muscle. In this case, tibialis anterior, sits at the front, performs a dorsiflexion of the foot. So you stimulate the deep branch of this common peroneal nerve, and then when you stimulate the nerve, the signal goes both up to the brain and it also goes down. So it causes a contraction, but it also goes up to the brain, synapses with some neurons, goes via the thalamus, etc., reaches the motor cortex at some point in time, this information, and at that point in time, you stimulate with magnetic stimulation, transcranial magnetic stimulation. So this is a rapidly changing magnetic field that induces electrical current in the tissue underneath. So you do this combination all the time. Peripheral nerve stimulation, stimulation up here. But you must ensure that the two are timed appropriately, because only if they're timed appropriately are you going to get any effects. So this means that the signal arising from this stimulation must reach the motor cortex before you stimulate. And you do this a number of times over a half-hour period, and what happens afterwards? The strength of the connection from the brain to the muscle is actually increased. You have an increase in that connection. Right? So stimulating will give a much more powerful contraction afterwards than before. Many studies have evolved from this, and this is great. But now you're going to say, well, how the hell are you going to take this into the hospital? Huh? How will you take this? I mean, you can't stimulate a person's brain that has just had a stroke. They don't want that, right? So what are you going to do? How are you going to do this? Well, this is where I was very lucky that I was working with two very nice gentlemen at Aalborg University. Dario Farina was one of them, who's now at Imperial College in London. And the other one, hey, Ted is back. And the other one was Ning Yang, who's now at the University of Waterloo. So both of them, we came together and we said, well, hey, let's try and change this part here. Let's try and replace that somehow. And what do we replace it with? Well, we replace it with something that we call a movement-related cortical potential. And what is this? It's kind of like the Mrachacz potential. If I had electrodes on top of your head, and you were sitting outside, and you wanted to kind of have a nice glass of wine, I would be able to tell you at least 2 seconds before you were going to reach for that glass that you're going to reach for it. It is via this potential. This potential here, it develops about 1 to 2 seconds before you even attempt to do a movement. The movement occurs at the peak negative phase here, and then you have this reafference occurring. And this signal, a nice property of this signal is it occurs no matter whether you are performing the movement or whether you are imagining to do the movement. So now you can follow. This would be great for stroke patients who have absolutely no possibility to move. So this is something that we thought, let's try and use this. And I remember many years ago, I was in a train, at one conference in a train with John Rockwood, who's in Imperial College London. And he said, so Natalie, what are you doing now? And I said, well, we're trying this. And he says, good luck. He didn't believe in this at all because he thought these signals are much too unstable. And you know what? They're not that unstable. They are there every time you perform a movement. But they are not always looking exactly the same. They do look different. They have variability. Because when you perform a movement, you don't always do it exactly the same way. You have many degrees of freedom, right? So you perform it slightly differently. And this guy here encodes force and speed. So obviously things are going to change somehow, right? But we were able to use this, and we did so very successfully. I'm going to show you some results in a moment. So this is the technology. So now we're moving from the basic neuroscience because we saw that this intervention worked just as well as what I showed you before. It increased the drive from the brain down to the muscle. So now it's time to develop the technology, and this is kind of what you see here in the schematic. So what do we have the patients do? The patients are actually looking at a screen, and they're following a movement on the screen, a cursor on the screen, that is telling them when to perform the movement. Now again, you might say to me, why on earth are you telling them what to do? They want to do something whenever they want to do it, right? But this is not the case. After talking a lot to the therapists, they said to us that if you're going to develop any BCI, do not develop one that is self-paced, where they do things whenever they want to. Develop one where they are being told what to do, because that is what they need, specifically in that stage of stroke. They need instructions, they want instructions. Right? So this is why we have the cursor on the screen. So they follow this cursor on the screen, and at this upward turn, that is when they attempt to perform a dorsiflexion movement. We have limited for now to dorsiflexion. We've started to work on the hand as well. And then we record online the EEG, and then we use the stimulator to stimulate at the time when this signal would reach up here, at the time of peak negativity. So this is the kind of BCI that we're using for this. Yeah?
4 minutes.
Oh, 4 minutes. Okay, I'm going to talk faster now. Okay, I just like telling stories sometimes. So, okay, so we developed this technology, and it took years, by the way. You know, between what I'm going to show you the final result and what we started were actually about 10, 12 years. Right? So it takes a really long time. But this is the clinical setting. This is one of my favorite therapists here, Helen. She's wonderful. She's fantastic, and she's really into the science. She wants to use technology, so she's fantastic. But you can see this is still our normal BCI technology setup, so we have to now make it nicer for the therapist. But she can actually be at the screen. She can look at the screen at the ongoing signal, and she can recognize certain features. I'll give you one example. You know, one of the patients, you know, he was kind of getting a little bit tired, you know, so he was still performing the movement, and he was still trying to comply, but he was getting a little bit tired. So, you know, I sort of said to him, hey, are you getting tired? And he said, how do you know? Yeah? I mean, how do you know this? Well, because we can see certain frequencies change in the EEG. So the therapists are trained to see that as well. So they can see when is the patient not really paying so much attention, when are they getting tired, you know, what do we need to do to them? Do we need to wake them up? Do we need to stop this therapy because it's not going to be effective anymore? It's fantastic. So this is the clinical setting, and now we need to make this nice and of course train the clinical staff. We are doing this at the moment. We have a new center that we're developing there, so it's really exciting for us and for them. And I just want to now show you the results of the effectiveness. So we have these patients come in 3 times a week for half an hour. So that was including everything, preparation, the whole thing. The intervention itself takes about it takes about 10 minutes. And they come in 3 times a week for 4 weeks. We have 2 different groups. One group that does the intervention plus all the normal therapy, and another group that gets a sham intervention. Right? So they get exactly the same, but it's sham. And they also get the normal therapy. And what we find, this is actually, what you see here is a lower extremity fugal Maya assessment scale. It looks at various factors of function. And it has a score out of 33. And what you can see is this is before, this is after for this group of BCIs. And for the sham group, you can see there's also an increase. And of course, there's an increase because, remember, these are acute, subacute patients. Some came 48 hours after they've had the stroke. But this here is the difference between them. So you can see actually significant. It's about 4 points on the Fugl-Meyer scale, and that is a clinical significant change, improvement. So you can start to think, damn, we are starting to get beyond this 70% proportional recovery rule in this phase of stroke. So we're really excited about this, and we're now starting the next plot with the MRI. So I have 2 minutes. Really quickly at ALS, because ALS was another problem, but we thought, okay, BCI. Many people have tried. Typically, the only things available in the home are using eye trackers, because that always works. You always have some eye movements. But no, there's no functioning BCI for ALS patients out on the market. And that's for various reasons. For one, we don't even really know what the signals look like over time. So what we're doing with my team is we are following these patients over a prolonged period and looking at how they decrease in function and how that relates back to their EEG pattern. It's a big undertaking. We have a lot of patients, and it actually surprises me how many. We have now up to date, I've tested like 50 patients of ALS in Denmark, where we're only 5 million people. And we have 120 new cases every single year. I mean, can you imagine the cost of that? I think in the States or here in Greece, the number would be even higher. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to follow them over time to try and develop this adaptable algorithm that is able to, because when you are not in a locked-in stage yet, the most obvious control signal to use for any type of robotic device would be muscle, right? That's obvious because that's much better, it's much more effective to use. But what happens when the patient is completely paralyzed? The muscles don't work anymore, so you have to use an alternative, and right now we just don't have one. So we're hoping by following these patients over time, we'll be able to see much better how the brain signals correlate to the muscle activity. And I'll just give you one quick example, because now you know this movement-related cortical potential. This is one of the patients, if we look at the basic neuroscience, who has a functional score of 0. He is locked in, he can only move his eyes, and we asked him to reach out to grab something. Of course, he's unable to do it, but we also asked him to open and close the hand. Look at this movement-related cortical potential, or the Mrachacz potential, in this patient who has been in this stage for 2 years. It is amazing. He still has the brain signals there, it's just nothing's getting to his muscle. So we're really hoping that we will be able to develop something from here. I mean, I don't think we'll be able to differentiate between opening and closing of the hand or between different movement types. But if we can use this as a kind of switch, like a brain switch, to say it's either on or off, we can do so much because sensory signals are still preserved. So we could have, for example, a menu around the neck, we're trying this out right now, where they get a brief electrical vibration or stimulation or something, and they produce this signal as an on or off switch for choosing. So we can actually have up to 8 degrees of freedom with these guys already. So we're really happy with this, and I know I've outstayed my welcome, so I'm not going to show you these. I'll show you this one really quickly. This is the patient who can still move. This is one of the devices that we're using that's commercially available. You can see he's closing his hand. We're using EEG signals to then extract, and then you can see the glove itself closes as well. We just use one commercially available glove. We're actually looking for a better alternative because this only has 3 fingers, but it works really well from the brain signals. Okay, so just really quickly, we have this challenge of a threefold user. We need the basic neuroscience, we need technology, and we need the clinical staff. We need to combine it in one. We've talked a lot yesterday, and to some extent, well, not so much today, about the fact that we have to merge engineers and doctors and clinical staff, but don't forget about the basic neuroscience, because if you forget about that, whatever you do is not going to be effective. Right? The BCI would not be effective if we didn't know about LTP and about cells that fire together, wire together. So keep that in mind, especially for all the young students, to make sure you have that. And with that, I'm just going to quickly thank some people. Yay, there you go. So this is Dario Farina, who's now at Imperial. This is Ning Yang, who's in Canada. And this is Helen, who is a therapist in Denmark. Thank you for your attention.